B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, March 14th, 2019. Are you ready for Beto? It's a totally unconventional candidacy, but it could be a real game changer as Democrats search for the guy who can beat Trump in 2020. Or gal. And that is one of Beto's problems. He's a white male in a year of heavy identity politics. But before we dive into Beto O'Rourke, just as I got ready to sit down behind the microphone for today's podcast, the news broke that the United States Senate has voted by 59 to 41 with 12 Republicans jumping ship from Donald Trump. They have voted to oppose the declaration of a national emergency to steal money for a border wall project from other already appropriated funds. And this is a bit of a constitutional crisis. It's an overreach. And it led one Republican senator, Jerry Moran of Kansas, to say, "I believe the use of emergency powers in this circumstance violates the Constitution. This continues our country down the path of all-powerful executive. Something those who wrote the Constitution were fearful of." Now, the majority of Republicans maintain Trump's fiction that we have a true emergency at the border that can only be addressed through this outsized presidential action. And because of the history here, where Trump sought the money and Congress flatly turned him down, this is going to set up an interesting court fight. And today's vote, which will be vetoed by Trump, he has already tweeted that threat, nevertheless lays the legal groundwork to show the intention of the Senate and the idiocy of the president. And will the court, now packed with Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, uphold the Constitution or the opportunism of this president? So, in addition to Moran of Kansas, we have Mike Lee of Utah, his colleague Mitt Romney of Utah, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, surprise for me, Marco Rubio of Florida, Patrick Toomey of Pennsylvania makes 6, Rand Paul of Kentucky 7, Tom Tillis of North Carolina is 8, and there are some other Republicans. This news article doesn't give me just a clean list. So this is an interesting moment. The margin clearly is not enough to overcome the presidential veto, and so the courts will be deciding this one. So Beto O'Rourke, as I mentioned, unorthodox, unconventional. The idea that you can run a Senate race against Ted Cruz and lose by 200,000 votes, and that creates the springboard from which you run for president? Well, these are unusual times, and clearly the Democratic field is wide open. People announce almost daily now, and there's a man from Florida who's running for president that you've never heard of that I'll get to in a moment. But Beto O'Rourke, I believe, does have an opportunity to redefine the Democratic base around his personality, not built on issues the way Bernie Sanders has built his so-called political revolution. And this is a very powerful force in America today. Personalities are much more compelling to the average voter than a list of what I'm going to do for you if you elect me president. Now, as I mentioned in my little flub at the intro, there are a lot of women running for president this year. And Beto O'Rourke has to squarely face that because he's a 46-year-old white guy. And he eschews labels when asked if he's a progressive. He said, I don't like labels that much. But based on his voting record in Congress, which is not too distinctive, he was a fairly moderate guy who voted his district from Texas. And he's going to have some explaining to do to attract the grassroots of the Democratic Party. So he went to Keokuk, Iowa today, and at a coffee shop on Main Street, he stood on a chair and announced that he's running for president to a startled group of people who said, "Who's he? And where did he come from?"
The United States of America.
You jumped there, Beto. So I want to play a little bit of his video announcement as his wife, Amy, sat there with the look of the political wife on her face. I almost feel sorry for the candidates' partners who have to serve as a prop. But she looked at him, she held his arm, and she smiled at appropriate times as he made this announcement. And I want you to listen carefully, because he constructs a frame for his candidacy much in the way that I saw Barack Obama do it in 2008. I'm young, I'm different. And Beto O'Rourke is focusing on the climate crisis and the political crisis in our country as the two big challenges that he says have reached a point where we either fix them or we don't. Let's listen to part of his announcement statement here. And again, I ask you to listen critically and listen to how he says things, and in the Obama style. He allows the viewer, the voter, to project onto him the resolutions to the problems that he cites. Here we go, Beto O'Rourke.
Amy and I are happy to share with you that I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. This is a defining moment of truth for this country and for every single one of us. The challenges that we face right now, the interconnected crises in our economy, our democracy, and our climate have never been greater, and they will either consume us or they will afford us the greatest opportunity to unleash the genius of the United States of America. In other words, this moment of peril produces perhaps the greatest moment of promise for this country and for everyone inside of it. We can begin by fixing our democracy and ensuring that our government works for everyone and not just for corporations. We can invest in the dignity of those who work and those who seek to work. We can ensure that every single American can see a doctor and be well enough to live to their full potential.
Now, listen carefully. He didn't mention Medicare for all. He didn't mention a Green New Deal. He doesn't talk about policy prescriptions. He builds it on his personality and this kind of we must take this on. It's a very powerful form of persuasion, and he is, I think, a very sharp and skilled political operator who knows how to do this.
And all of us, wherever you live, can acknowledge that if immigration is a problem, it's the best possible problem for this country to have, and we should ensure that there are lawful paths to work, to be with family, and to flee persecution. We can listen to and lift up rural America. We can work on real justice reform and confront the hard truths of slavery and segregation and suppression in these United States of America.
So he just appealed to the Trump voter with his rural comment, and then he talked about the issues of inner city and minority populations. And again, he identifies the problems without proposing explicit solutions. And this is a form of political campaigning that has proven to be very potent in this country in the past.
We can reassert our global leadership and end these decades-long wars and be there for every woman and man who has served in them. And perhaps most importantly of all, because our very existence depends on it, we can unleash the ingenuity and creativity of millions of Americans who want to ensure that we squarely confront the challenge of climate change before it's too late.
So I find this quite compelling. And at the same time, I know many of my listeners are saying, but Tulsi is explicitly against regime change wars. And Bernie, he stands for a $15 minimum wage and Medicare for all and free college tuition. And it's going to be fascinating to see, because you're going to see a lot of Beto. He's going to get a lot of favorable, fuzzy media coverage. And Bernie's going to be plugging away there, issue by issue, plank by plank. And at this point, I have no prediction about who will prevail. I'm open-minded. Bernie and Beto ticket? I think many people would be interested in that. We're going to see how it plays out. And I mentioned this long-shot candidate, you've never heard of him. Mayor Wayne Messam, M-E-S-S-A-M. He was just recently reelected as the ceremonial mayor of Miramar, a South City, Florida of 140,000. And he's decided to join the fray here. I think this makes 14, maybe, declared candidates. And their focus, the Messam campaign, is going to be primarily on a proposal to cancel the $1.5 trillion in student debt accrued by Americans. Good luck. We also have the mayor of, South Bend, Indiana, Pete Bug. I can't pronounce his name unless it's printed out in front of me. So in addition to the repudiation by the Senate today of Trump's emergency declaration to steal money for the border wall, yesterday there was another vote in the Senate, 54-46, directing Trump to withdraw U.S. forces from hostilities in Yemen and to stop backing the Saudi forces with intelligence and other support services. And Bernie Sanders, who wrote the bill, says it's an historical vote. We're going to help end a war which has caused unbelievable horror to one of the poorest countries on earth. We should not be following the lead of a despotic, murderous regime like Saudi Arabia. Congress is reasserting its constitutional responsibilities to be the body that determines war issues, not give up to any president. Now, this is an important move forward, but it's not the first time. And the Republicans keep using parliamentary tactics to delay this bill. They have repeatedly sent it back to the House. And this gets into arcane designations of whether it is a privileged resolution or not. And so, to stop it from passing the House last year, Republicans slipped language that deprivileged the resolution into a measure advancing a bill about wolves. And congressional Republicans succeeded in attaching language about anti-Semitism as an excuse to deprivilege that version before the Senate. So the one that passed yesterday is an attempt to restart the process without any tricks. And we'll see if it succeeds. It'll likely draw another veto from Trump if and when it does land on his desk. Now, we spent a week seeing the pillorying of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. She was smeared for remarks that were called vile and anti-Semitic, remarks that she did not make, because she has never referenced Jews or made anti-Semitic comments in her public statements. She has talked about the outsized power of the Israel lobby and its lobby group AIPAC in this country. And yesterday, a true act of anti-Semitism was discovered in New York at a subway station. A poster advertising the book of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was vandalized. And they attached an anti-Semitic slur. A swastika was scrawled over her face. One of the things that we're permitted to know is "Die Jew" was written on it, and then an unexplained profane slur in capital letters was also put on this advertising poster. Now, there were 86 hate crimes reported in New York as of March 10th, that's this year, an increase of 62% over the same period last year. Now, what's critical for me here is this is real anti-Semitism. This is the virus that needs to be approached and dealt with. But the phony claims of political rhetoric that is critical of the State of Israel and its supporters, which is truly not anti-Semitic, only waters down the impact of true hate crimes and anti-Semitic actions and expressions. And will we see AIPAC and the associated lobby groups that support the State of Israel? Will they come to the support of Ruth Bader Ginsburg? After all, she's a liberal. We'll see, won't we? In an interview with Breitbart this week, Trump used some of his coded language and incoherent expression to basically offer a threat that some of his more extreme supporters, those who ride motorcycles and carry sidearms, open carry, this gets lost in some of his syntax and word salad. But he said law enforcement, military, construction workers, bikers for Trump. How about bikers for Trump? They travel all over the country. They got Trump all over the place, and they're great. They've been great. But these are tough people. These are great people. But they're peaceful people, and Antifa and all, they'd better hope they stay that way. I hope they stay that way. I hope they stay that way. Now, you may think that he is a clumsy speaker, and he is. But there is a not so thinly veiled threat here. And if you recall, after the Kavanaugh hearings, when he flipped everything 180 degrees and declared that the angry liberal mobs that had tried to railroad Brett Kavanaugh were this big threat to America. And he said this every night as he went to mob rallies staged for the midterm elections, where he routinely lied about just about everything, including this. And so he does have a way of communicating with his base and sending these dog whistle signals. And Pittsburgh is the best example of the dog who heard that whistle, grabbed a gun, and mowed down Jewish Americans. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Today, we mention William Janetta, Ted Kelly, Brian Mazzy, and Terry Paris. They all kick in $5 or $10 a month to help me keep this operation going. And you can do it too. I wish you would. Come on over to peterbcollins.com, find the menu button, then click on Become a Subscriber in short order. You're on the sign-up page, and you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month. I've got a bonus book for you. It is Justin Frank's great book about Trump called Trump on the Couch, a little psychoanalysis for our crazy president. I'm sorry, the stable genius. It can be yours with a new annual subscription and a mailing address in the continental U.S. So yesterday, after it became untenable for the United States to be the only country still flying the 737 MAX jets after the accident and crash in Ethiopia on Sunday, Trump had to grandstand. He made the announcement himself. Now, you know he didn't make the decision himself. But he took the opportunity to get his face on TV, and what we're learning is that pilots have been fuming for months since the Lion Air crash of a 737 MAX last fall. And at issue here is this software that is installed on the planes, and it's called MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. And this appears to be the software that is malfunctioning and causing these planes to nosedive out of the control of the pilots who try to take manual control with the rudder. And the pilots are really upset about this. Some say that the government shutdown of 35 days delayed the FAA's response to addressing this issue. Others say that they met with Boeing officials and the FAA back around Thanksgiving and were told that the software patch would be coming soon. But their biggest outrage is that they were never told about this software when the planes were deployed, and they weren't trained on it. And Boeing says, well, we didn't want to confuse you with too much information. Now, that's a paraphrase, and I want to be fair to them. But here's one pilot who posted on an internal blog, I think it's unconscionable that a manufacturer, the FAA, and the airlines would have pilots flying an airplane without adequately training or even providing available resources and sufficient documentation to understand the highly complex systems that differentiate this aircraft from prior models. The fact that this plane requires such jury rigging to fly is a red flag. Now we know the systems employed are error-prone, even if the pilots aren't sure what those systems are, what redundancies are in place, and failure modes. So we got some work to do if we want real safety in the skies. This is a really disgusting report I have to pass along to you. because Trump is appealing to the basest elements of his base. He is pandering to their sense that it's creepy for someone to experience gender dysphoria and wish to identify as a sex that wasn't the sex of their birth. And so the new rules have been announced. It's not a total ban on trans people serving in the military, but new and existing service members will only have 30 days to qualify for gender transition, after which transgender people will not be allowed to enlist or receive medical treatment unless they're exempt. And I won't name names here, but I have a family friend who's serving in the Air Force, and she is transitioning to he. Some of the surgeries have already taken place. And I don't know what this person's status will be under the new rules. It's really ugly, it's divisive, and the Russians didn't have anything to do with it, if I may be so bold as to point that out. Well, when Account Temp sent Matthew Whitaker to play Attorney General for a couple of months after Trump fired Jeff Sessions, he kind of just kept the seat warm. He didn't pull any of the maneuvers that people like me worried about that he would, like firing Mueller. And yesterday, he was back before the House Judiciary Committee to clarify his comments in a recent hearing about whether or not Trump called him to discuss the Michael Cohen case and to try to reassign the U.S. attorney who was prosecuting it. And Whitaker, who testified in a closed session, so we only have the hearsay coming from people who were in the room. We are told that he told lawmakers that he didn't remember a conversation with the president like one that CNN described where Trump called and yelled at him about the Michael Cohen case. At another point, he said he couldn't discuss his conversations with Trump. But Jerry Nadler, the Democratic chair, after the hearing, said Whitaker had discussed whether the Southern District, that's the U.S. Attorney in New York, went too far in pursuing the campaign finance case in which the president was listed as individual one. And then this guy Collins, what's his first name? Maybe George Collins he's a Republican from Georgia. He asked Whitaker if it was correct that he had not spoken to Trump about the Cohen case, and Whitaker said that had not, in fact, been his testimony. So it's a backhanded way of acknowledging, yes, he did talk to Trump about that. The House passed a resolution that's non-binding, but it was a stunning bipartisan vote of 420-0, demanding that the Department of Justice release to Congress and the public the full findings of the Mueller investigation. The 4 people who voted present were Republicans. 2 are the kind of Bill of Rights guys. That would be Justin Amash of Michigan and Thomas Massie of Kentucky. And then 2 outsized Trump loyalists, Matt Gaetz of Florida and Paul Gosar of Arizona. An appeals court has ruled in a libel case that has been filed against Trump that a sitting president is not immune to state-level civil trials. And this is the case of Summer Zervos, who was a contestant on Trump's TV show. She reports that he groped her twice, and then when she went public with that claim, he said she's a liar. So the court wrote, despite the suggestion that Trump is the embodiment of the executive branch, and though he is tasked with significant responsibilities, the president is still a person, and he is not above the law. Trump Co. getting a drubbing in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, where there's still a few liberals left on the bench. And this relates to 3 sanctuary laws that have been challenged, passed by the state of California, and challenged by the Trump administration. Now, they sued California last year, challenging a package of new laws designed to protect undocumented immigrants in detention facilities and workplaces. The most far-reaching law limiting local law enforcement cooperation with federal immigration agents was upheld by a federal judge last July, and the Ninth Circuit 3-panel of judges appears to be backing that. They questioned the government. Are you entitled to the aid of state government in enforcing the immigration laws? Where is that in a statute or the Constitution? And a Justice Department attorney responded that the state had created an obstacle to the enforcement of federal law, and another judge fired back, because it's an obstacle doesn't mean it's illegal, right? You can be frustrated, but that's not our problem. Now, there's also a case that the judges appeared to be weighing in against, and that is AB 103, which authorizes California's Attorney General to inspect private detention centers under federal government contract. And the court seems to be thinking that that is an interference in federal operations. I want to thank my friend and listener Ford Green, who posted on Facebook before Facebook crashed, and then I couldn't find this. I had to do a Google search. But there was a stunning exchange between Congresswoman Nanette Berrigan. She is a freshwoman Democrat from Southern California, and she recently crossed the border at San Diego a couple of times, she said, with her mother. And in one of those crossings, she shot video of a Customs and Border Patrol officer in an interchange with a person seeking asylum. And she videotaped the officer who gave illegal instructions to this asylum seeker, telling him he had to go back to Mexico and fill out a form and get in line. And in this exchange with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, Nanette Berrigan really ripped into her. And I'd like you to hear part of this because, well, it made me feel good.
A gentleman say, I'm from Honduras, I want to apply for asylum. He was already at the turnstile at the Ped West entry. And the agent said, sir, unless you have a visa, you need to leave. You need to go away. They didn't say what you just said people do. They didn't say, here is where you go get on a list. They didn't say, here is the information where you go get access to counsel. As a matter of fact, I pulled out my phone, I started to record, and you know what? I was asked to stop recording. Why? Because they don't want the American people knowing what is happening at that southern border. And Madam Secretary, I don't know if you know what's happening, or if this is happening without you knowing, but it's totally unacceptable. And as a member of this committee, you're darn right I'm going to hold you accountable for knowing what's happening at the bottom. Do you know that 2 members of Congress had to sleep overnight and spend 14 hours in the cold on the concrete at the Otay Mesa port of entry so that Maria, the woman who was tear gassed at the port of entry, would be allowed to present herself because she was on U.S. soil, and legally that's what asylum allows? Did you know that?
Ma'am, what I know is I would ask you...
Yes or no? Did you know that 2 members of Congress had to do that?
I know that we have a process.
Okay, you obviously don't know. But see, this is...
And she's not willing to answer the question, yes or no. Good work, Congresswoman Berrigan. I did mention Facebook. They had a massive outage that affected the Facebook platform, along with Instagram and WhatsApp yesterday. It was worldwide. We were trying to stream a video feed and would not cooperate. And apparently the problems are not completely fixed. And it was so dire that Facebook had to take to Twitter to let people know. We're aware that some people are currently having trouble accessing the Facebook family of apps. We're working to resolve the issue as soon as possible. And Facebook, more seriously, is facing a federal investigation into the deals that they struck with the world's largest tech companies to swap the personal data that they collected from Facebook users. There were more than 150 of the companies, and this appears to violate both FTC and SEC investigation settlements that Facebook had entered into. And one person who's been in contact with the investigation said they seem to be focusing a lot on Cambridge Analytica. Today I'm releasing for my listeners an in-depth interview with Dr. Wilmer Leon. And if you haven't seen the movie Green Book, you may want to hold off on listening to this interview. As a spoiler alert, I want you to know that we talk in detail about the plot and the characters. And Dr. Wilmer Leon, who interviewed members of the family for his satellite radio show, the family of Don Shirley, the man who's the center focus of the film, and they are still quite angry at the way the screenwriters and producers depicted him. And I want to thank Jerry Fresha, who heard the interview. It was posted a couple of weeks ago at Who, What, Why. And he said that he found it, and he really appreciated Dr. Leon's articulation of his position and that of the family. This ought to be heard far and wide. Interestingly, as all of this was unfolding, I had an email exchange with an old friend who didn't quite get what the controversy was all about, so I sent him the interview, and Jerry says, just great stuff. Here is an excerpt from my conversation with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where he identifies the issues that upset the family.
Well, I think their objections, in summary, are the family is highly, highly insulted and offended that they were not consulted on the film, and that even now that they are raising their issues, which are incredibly legitimate issues, Peter Fairley and Viggo Mortensen seem to be very, very dismissive about the family's position and unwilling to just admit they made a mistake and they're sorry.
That's Dr. Wilmer Leon. You can hear the full interview. It's posted at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, and Stitcher. And I hope you get something out of it. Feel free to drop me a line if you do. And finally today, the Brexit chaos continues in Britain. We've got 15 days left to the nominal deadline. Yesterday, Parliament voted against holding a second referendum on the matter. I think that was a dumb move. And the Parliament continues to reject the pleadings of Prime Minister Theresa May, who is a clear lame duck. She's lost control of her own party in this process. Parliament may try to take control of the Brexit process by voting on a series of amendments, one of which would schedule rapid-fire votes to audition potential new plans. Another would demand time for a second referendum, but that's not expected to win approval. And the vote to ask for a delay. No, I'm sorry. This was the vote to reject a second referendum was 334 to 85, with 200 lawmakers abstaining. So it's a real mess, and anybody's guess where it goes from here. Thanks for joining me today for my news and comment podcast. You listened to the very bitter end. Good for you. And you'll find this podcast on YouTube. I always encourage you to share it far and wide. I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.